Hello, everyone. Welcome to Infopedia. I'm your host, Crage2.
I'm Frankie.
And I'm Teafed.
Today we have a very special episode for you, which covers a topic that's very close to each of our hearts individually. This one's about the Coaster Wars, which was a very important event that took place between 1930 and approximately 1962.
To even begin to process the historical toll that the Coaster Wars took, we have to rewind even further back into the history of roller coasters to begin with.
But not before, sorry to interrupt you, but not before our important sponsorship plug for this episode, which, you know, in typical Infopedia fashion is actually closely related to the subject material itself. So many of us are aware of Disneyland, one of the most attractive and normal theme parks in all of America. Many, even fewer people are aware of Tokyo Disney Sea, which is a Tokyo theme park that is on the water. And many of us are aware that Disney Air, which was the first air-based roller coaster area, launched just a couple of weeks ago. But without even missing a beat, the newest Disney attraction, Disney Space, is going to be open to the public as early as tomorrow, August 93rd.
Yeah, this is a worldwide first. This is the world's first world encompassing ad campaign ever, which means that you've probably already heard this advertisement before. They have paid every stream of media that exists that is capable of advertising. Disney Space has advertised on it. The first 100% population ad campaign. So, but if you haven't heard it, now you know.
Now that we've sort of introduced our plug, let's actually segue into a segment where we discuss some of the Disney parks. They're not really part of the Coaster War, but we are sponsored by them, so you know we should at least talk about it. So you got your two main ones, the OGs. You have Disneyland and Disney World. Fireworks show make it looks like Disneyland is burning to the ground. Now, many people fail to understand the significance of this, but fortunately, Disneyland is here to stay, and the scary fire no look bad when we think about when we're looking at it.
Yeah, I've always thought they were beautiful fireworks. They were scary, but like fright is beautiful.
For a long time, there was a conspiracy theory that, and by the way, for whatever reason, when it comes to Disney parks in particular, there are so many conspiracy theories, both true and untrue. But this, I think, is a very funny conspiracy theory that they have the fireworks show every single night, approximately at sundown, and what makes it look like it's burning to the ground is the pyrotechnics, but the conspiracy is that it actually does burn to the ground every night, and before the park opens the next morning, they have a special team who comes in and rebuilds it from the ground up every night, and they're able to do this because they're so rich. So
I think that one of the lesser talked about Disney attractions is Disney Sea. So this was actually a part of a major fissure in the world of amusement after a coup d'etat at SeaWorld in San Diego basically annihilated the entire concept of the independent theme park in North America for a couple of years, specifically SeaWorld. Their iconic mascot Shamu, the beluga whale, or whatever the fuck, was replaced by Smelly the Shark. Smelly the Shark, incredibly popular, incredibly prolific, although it's one of the most notable things about him as a sponsor is this: despite the fact that he's been utilized in all of their branding and all of their media, he has never been featured in merchandise due to a law.
My favorite Disney casino and resort is Disney Air. This was, I think, back in 1998 when a fissure in space-time caused a sky island to form above the city of Jermuk in Armenia. And it was immediately bought out by Disney, where they henceforth implemented a air-themed theme park.
Back to my favorite part of the Disney parks is unexpectedly the transportation rides. They're really good at making sure that you can, in a timely manner, get to any part of the park that you need to go to. And they're actually implementing the world's first teleportation system so that you can literally park hop. We've all heard the park hopper pass, but there is a teleportation system in the works, so that if you purchase a platinum tier pass, you can hop from Disneyland to Disney World to Disney Air to Disney Sea to Disney Space to the heretofore unbuilt Disney Cave, which exists only in a future scenario. That is not even in our main timeline, but a branching off timeline. Regardless, you can, again, sponsored by Disney. If you get the Platinum Pass, you will have access to all of the existing parks as well as any future parks that exist in any timelines, branching or primary.
Frankie, what can you tell us about the overview of the Coaster Wars?
Well, the Coaster Wars was a heated collection of battles between all types of roller coaster manufacturers to essentially break records and create one-of-a-kind experiences for coaster heads all over the planet.
Let's talk a little bit about the history of not just roller coasters, but amusement in general. So amusement, according to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, is when you have the most fun that you can in a place with a theme. We saw the first origins of the roller coaster in the steam age. One of the things that steam power enabled us to do was to move things that were on wheels without having to have any horse. And horse was one of the biggest hurdles because horses can only go fast as the horse can go, but unfortunately they can't go faster than the horse can go. But steam has no limits. Now we think about in the 1910s, which is about 100 years after the steam locomotive engine was invented, but amusement parks were starting to get popular all over America. But what were those parks doing before there were coasters?
A lot of these parks were cemeteries, burial grounds, but I feel like there was a push to kind of amuse both the living and dead as sort of a just-in-case measure to prevent any hauntings, because that's never good for the votes. So.
At the time, it was there was a lot of shaky religious ground about what happened to you after you died. So many people were realizing, hey, we were really, as a living people, really enjoying this entertainment thing, but it's not in the Bible or the Quran or the Torah or the Baha'i book. There's no indication about what kind of amusement that they have in the afterlife because no one knew what amusement was yet. So now, with the advent of the new idea of amusement and fun, we have to have, for the dead, have to be able to have fun in too.
Yeah, and as a result of this tradition, all subsequent amusement parks have a traditional graveyard burial center that park attendees can pay respect to whatever dead people are there.
If you ever go to an amusement park in the morning or as you're leaving, you will notice that they do, in fact, do a few runs of every ride at the beginning and the end. While it might seem like they're simply doing safety testing, these are specially ordained rides specifically for any spirits, poltergeists, ghosts in the area lingering about to be able to enjoy the coasters without having to possess an attendee.
Teafed, why don't you talk to us about one of the first amusement parks ever noticed?
The first theme park or amusement park to capture the attention of other people is Cedar Point in Ohio, USA. This was in 1904. John Denver Carolado, we're going to talk about him. He was the architect behind a lot of the roller coasters that would come to influence the world. And he plodded around making roller coasters for years that was somewhat popular in the local area. But he is mostly known nowadays for inventing the first proper real roller coaster, the hypercoaster.
Not only was the hypercoaster the first ever roller coaster, it was also the first ever roller coaster to have seats, and it was called the hypercoaster because it was quote-unquote hyper comfy. John Denver Carolado was quoted as saying, "It's a coaster for your body," end quote.
An interesting fact about coasters, or what we would now retronymically refer to as coasters, is most of them, because they did not have seats, were either a standing or a lying affair. Most of them were basically adapted from unused coffins, which would be placed on a slab with wheels and pushed down a hill. The attendees were not able to see what was happening in front of them, nor were they able to steer. This led to many fatalities during the course of the ride, which in a lot of ways was a little bit convenient because they were pretty much ready to go, and they would usually have some pits at the end of the course that prepared for the freshly created corpses, which I think dovetails really well with the end of the coaster wars, which is a topic we'll get to much later. But let's just flash forward just a little bit, and this is because amusement parks are taking over America. There's amusement, like at least one amusement park for every 20 people that live on the planet. But it wasn't until 1930 when Mr. Jones' Wild Ride would enter its first year of operations that everything would change.
So this was in Cedar Point still, and you could tell why Cedar Point Amusement Park was like just so influential. It had the first hypercoaster ever. It had Mr. Jones's Wild Ride. The construction of Mr. Jones's Wild Ride changed the world fundamentally, I would say. It was created by a guy named who went by Mr. Jones, now known as Saint Jones. Mr. Jones was kind of an outsider because he wasn't part of the coaster business. He wasn't affiliated with any theme parks except for the ones he contacted asking to build a coaster. Of course, everyone knew about St. Jones, and no one could deny hosting one of his famous coasters. But Mr. Jones's most famous creation is at Cedar Point, Ohio.
Even to this day, Mr. Jones's Wild Ride is one of the most beloved coasters to have ever existed. It was the world's first public service announcement themed coaster. A lot of people don't know this, but Mr. Jones was actually a youth pastor before he was an engineer. He was trying to get into all new ways of preaching to the youth. He started doing music, and that didn't work out so well. He eventually landed on engineering. He thought it would be the quickest and easiest way to get his word out amongst as many people as he could was to get his doctorate in engineering and physics, to create a series of public service announcement themed coasters. So Mr. Jones's Wild Ride specifically was about the dangers of drinking and driving. The premise and plot of the coaster, if you will, was that you, the passenger, are, you are drunk behind the wheel, and it's not long, and we're not talking buzzed. although buzzed driving is drunk driving, we are talking, like 6 whiskey deep. Whiskey was the big kind of drink in the 1930s. We're talking slizzard, shortly once this is established that you, the passenger, are in fact hammered, out of nowhere, a bright light flashes, and you are then overtaken, T-boned by a locomotive. This then sends you on a Dante's Inferno-esque journey through all 9 circles of hell, where you are never redeemed, and in fact, hell is where you stay as a passenger and as a contributor to this interactive story that Mr. Jones' Wild Ride paints. You are dumped off at a gift shop that is hell-themed, where you can purchase different demons and different historical figures that have also landed themselves in the deepest pits and malabulges of hell. How was this a catalyst for the beginning of the Coaster Wars? How did the Coaster Wars start?
It was the best roller coaster, full stop.
The most exciting thing that can happen in a person's life is to die. Very few experiences can come close to the pure dread of one's own mortality. This would be understood emphatically by a specific 1962 roller coaster designer, but that's a story for approximately 7.9 minutes from now. What really made this ride stand out amongst all of the other competing coaster rides boils down to one simple element. Nobody who wrote it was the same person when they got off. Because once you've experienced death, everything else is just a fantasy. Everything else is just nonsense. And it's hard to interpret now from the perspective of the lay people of today's time who have been placated with, non-rides and safety. But in that time period, when a painted particle board cutout of flames was engulfing you and a speaker was playing malicious laughter, many people had surmised that they had indeed themselves gone to hell. The idea of fiction and fantasy was not prolifically understood in the 1930s. This was before any books had ever even been written about something that wasn't true. But this experience would really catalyze what was known colloquially as the Coaster Wars.
What are some parks that were participating in the Coaster Wars? Probably shouldn't say participating, more like fighting, competing.
Opened in 1933, Carnetopia was located in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. This was the world's first meat-themed roller coaster, but it wouldn't be the last. Carnetopia's biggest ride was the meat wagon. And in this ride, you would sit upon a throne of flesh, which was paraded through a small village, and various birds and insects and festering bacteria would assault the mountain of flesh that you sat upon. And as this would occur, fumes would enter the lungs of the participants, creating a hallucinogenic effect that gave them the experience of going as fast as Mach 2 or Mach 3. It was a Mach 2 experience. And the G-force that could be experienced from this greatly exceeded what is now understood to be fatal amount of G-force, which is 10 Gs. So this was an 11G, 15G ride without having to move at all, just based on a short-lived hypnagogic experience.
Sadly, Carnetopia lost the Coaster Wars due to corporate espionage. The aforementioned Cedar Point had hired marketplace anthropologists to conduct demographic research upon the people of Rio, and were able to conduct a PSYOP by which they were able to advertise barbecue at record low prices, which unfortunately stole their entire attendee base. People were then booking flights to go from Rio to Ohio, of all places. And this park was decimated as a result. It was reduced to, that's right, 1/10 of its previous size, as is the definition of decimated. It was then thoroughly and rapidly reclaimed by nature. However, following the attacks on the Twin Towers, it was reopened in 2001 as a nature reserve, as well as some of its rides were restored as an amusement park. And in a strange and shocking turn of events, Carnotopia was renamed Vegetopia and was the world's first and only vegan-based theme park.
So I think my all-time favorite amusement park is Shaftesbury Farm. This is in Shaftesbury, England. And they pride themselves in having the most boring roller coasters. For example, one of them has a beige theme. Shepherd's Delight is a fun one. It's a wool coaster. You travel through a flock of sheep and try not to hit them. Obviously, you don't have a wheel, so you can't really avoid them. But anyways, there's that. One of them's a parking simulator. Really, really boring stuff, and really ahead of its time, honestly. They also pride themselves in having the world's slowest roller coaster, which goes a whole 10 feet. Everyone hates Shaftesbury, but I love it.
Well, actually, not everyone hates Shaftesbury. I know it's also pronounced Shaftesbury, but that's only for native English speakers would know that. But in any case, there is actually the ride that you mentioned, which is a parking simulator, isn't really much of a simulator at all. In fact, it's actually an alternate parking lot in which a set of staff vehicles are located on the premises, and after waiting in line for exactly 2.5 hours, you're loaded, you and your party, into one of these vehicles where you drive approximately 15 kilometers to an adjacent parking structure where you will find a parking spot in this lot, and then walk from that parking lot into the parking lot where your own car is, and then exit the park and return to your domicile. And most people mistakenly take this ride early in the day or middle of the day, and as a result, they are left without any more amusement for the rest of the day. This is the coward's way, and most experienced Shaftesbury Farm attendees prefer to take this ride at the end of the day as a nightcap, as the ending experience. So to redact a previously expressed sentiment, everyone actually loves Shaftesbury, and while it might be the home to the world's slowest roller coaster, it's only slow based on the amount of the distance traveled versus the amount of time that it takes to travel there. In reality, there's nothing slow about the coaster except for its speed.
So a lot of people have the wrong and mistaken idea that the Coaster Wars were simply an American domestic affair, but nothing could be farther from the truth, as Nagashima Spa Land entered the Coaster Wars. A key part of the Coaster Wars that we failed to mention previously was that one of the main facets of the advancement of the Coaster Wars was these different coaster manufacturers, Bollinger and Mabillard, Vekoma, Gravity Group, Togo, for just to name a few, for example. They were all concerned with breaking records, and that's where Nagashima Spa Land comes in. They were able to create a hybrid coaster that incorporated a water element, not just as part of the theming of the coaster, but as a part of the coaster itself. So Nagashima Spa Land broke the record for creating the world's first Waterland hybrid coaster. Most coaster developers had water elements as a part of the landscaping, but failed to incorporate water as a main feature of the coaster. But that's where Peter Rabbit Coaster comes in. So Nagashima Spa Land, when you think of Nagashima Spa Land, what pops into your head? Spa. So why spas, right? Well, as we all know, in Japan, onsen culture is a huge part of everyday life for the Japanese normie. So you go to work, you go to the spa, you strip down to your nudist, most beautiful self. You cleanse your mind, body, and soul at the spa, at the onsen. So Nagashima Spa Land is essentially a like that on steroids. It's onsen culture on steroids. So Peter Rabbit Coaster was the world's first jacuzzi coaster. What's a jacuzzi coaster? Well, I'm so glad you asked. It is a coaster whose individual cars on the train were actually jacuzzis. So there would be 3 cars per train and 2 trains in the as a part of the track. Each jacuzzi was a standard 3x3 units. If we're playing The Sims, it could fit about 9 Sims, which are people. It could fit about 9 people per car. And it was quite splish, splashy, splashy. So the water bill at Nagashima Spa Land was, as to be expected, quite high, but numbers don't lie. They were very successful all the while. Now, why is it called Peter Rabbit Coaster? It's because there was actually a theming element to it. Not only was it the first jacuzzi coaster, but the cars themselves were actually modeled to be cauldrons, and the guests on the coaster were all rabbits, if you will. And the idea of the coaster was that you would be cooked alive. Not actually, but the idea was that you would be cooked alive, turned into a rabbit stew, a Peter Rabbit stew. It was, again, a groundbreaking culinary jacuzzi coaster that the likes of which have never been seen. And frankly, I've been saving up my money to be able to go there myself.
We also have Willy Wonka's Wild Amusement Park in Wyoming, USA. There was actually a movie based on the theme park called Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which did okay. I liked it. I thought it was good. The foam ride made an appearance in the movie, the famous foam ride from the Wild Amusement Park, where you get slathered and foamed up from head to toe. Well, it's very fun for kids and the elderly alike.
I'd like to give my impression of the ride, of the foam ride. I believe it goes a little something like this.
Let's talk about something where corporate greed invented a park. Something that everyone really liked. Enter Justice World, which was located in Sioux City, Nebraska.
It's Sioux City.
Oh, that's not true. So this was really, the story of this park is the story of a humble corn peddler named Giuseppe Monrovia, who would become the proprietor of the park after creating a very humble yet entertaining ride. This ride, the Corn Peddler's Journey, named after Giuseppe Monrovia, was the world's longest roller coaster, and it retains that record, or it would have, if it not had been destroyed by an errant missile strike in the war of the coasters itself. But this ride was very unique in the sense specifically that, unlike ordinary roller coasters, which have usually some type of element where you use gravity to propel you through the coaster, this was a 35-mile long straight line to travel northeast through nothing but cornfields, And at the end of the ride, you would reach the city of Marcus, Nebraska, right at the end. So one of the attributes of this ride that made it so significant was that it was not only the longest ride, but it was also the normalest speed. It reached the average speed of all roller coasters put together at that time, which was tracked meticulously by a team of statisticians who worked on site and off site to collect information in real time from all over the world. Delivering the most benign experience possible, which by the law of large numbers brings in the most amount of people, since most people want what's normal. They want something that's average. They're not interested in something that's too exceptional. And this was a very smart decision, although the operation cost of the ride ended up being astronomical because of the number of PhDs and mathematicians that needed to be hired in order to perform in this ride. So one of the largest draws to this was free fast passes. Now, the free fast passes weren't just given to anyone. They were mostly for death row convicts. And as many people are aware, Marcus, Nebraska is one of the entry points to the recruitment center for the Coaster Wars, in which a sort of a guerrilla fighters were trained in the art of coaster warfare. And it was largely understood that, one man enter, no man leaves when it comes to these cities. So many death row inmates would forgo their persecution for their heinous crimes against humanity by simply joining the war on coasters. So this lit the fuel. These people really became the incendiary kindling that created the wars themselves. They were the war fighters, and unlike ordinary citizens who are held back by their sense of morality or perhaps their own personal character and inhibitions, these people, worthless in all regards, irredeemable specks of human waste, were now able to be given a divine purpose for killing and hurting in a way that's good, which is war. So let's talk about one of one of the most interesting attractions that they had there, besides the Corn 35-mile long Corn Peddler's Journey. This coaster was called Whiplash. And this was one of the most unique coasters that's ever been created, as the first ultra hypercoaster. And what that means is in a hypercoaster, you get on the ride, you go around, you sit in it, and then you end, and then you're off the ride. But ultra hypercoaster ends before it begins. So as you approach the ride to get on, you see the cart reach the station, and you watch yourself exit the ride along with the other passengers in your ride, and then you take a seat in the ride, and then the ride begins from your perspective, and then as you exit the ride, you see yourself boarding the ride as you're exiting it, which is essentially the way that this is accomplished is through the principle of having the fastest brakes in the world. This ride, Whiplash, can travel from 60 miles per hour to 0 miles per hour in 15 microseconds, which is enough of a change in the temporal field and the physical fabric of reality that it enables you to not have to worry about that kind of shit anymore, because it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? It's just all taken care of. It all comes out in the wash. One of the benefits of this ride is that you lose approximately 3 minutes of your life since you come back. And you come off the ride, and the clock goes before you started the ride. Hence, when you exit the ride, you will have aged approximately 3 minutes without gaining any time in the relative scope of things of people who are not on the ride. This also leads us to one of our most controversial and perhaps one of the most topical subjects of here.
One of the most pivotal points in the wars between coasters and coaster companies and coaster citizens was when the famous Mr. Jones' Wild Ride was demolished. This was in 1942, a mere 12 years after it was launched. No pun intended. Why, you ask? Well, it suffered from success. Queue times became so long that it started to infringe on the human rights that we hold dear. It was so long that people were visibly aging, but the runners of the park decided we got to put down the ride, like a rabid dog. After it was demolished, which by the way was a huge struggle, there were protests all across the city to keep it from closing, but But the blueprints for Mr. Jones's Wild Ride were actually lost. Perhaps lost, maybe secretly kept away from public view for some reason. But, I mean, getting your hands on those blueprints became the holy grail of the coaster industry. Yeah, I mean, there have been many knockoffs and imitations of the coaster since that point, but none of them could reach the majesty and magic of the original.
So how did the Coaster Wars end? We know that the war endured for about 32 years from 1930 to about 1962. And the answer is quite controversial. The Coaster Wars were ended by a particularly controversial coaster, which up until Justice World had actually implemented this design, was the subject of many a philosophical debate amongst Redditors on the internet. It was none other than the euthanasia coaster. It was constructed by Julie Jonas or Bonus, who was a prodigy engineer, a mere 15 years old, interested in justice and interested in punishments in particular. Now, up until his design, it was thought to be impossible to kill someone via roller coaster on purpose. Up until the euthanasia coaster, all deaths were deemed accidents. This was the first intentional murder coaster. So, as we all know, the appeal of coasters, whether you realize it or not, is to feel the adrenaline of what you would only imagine are your final moments on this earth. The beauty of life is that it will end. And what better way to remind yourself of that than to put yourself in death-defying contraptions concocted by madmen? And the euthanasia coaster took that principle of mortality, coming face to face with it, and taking it to its logical conclusion. As we mentioned before, Marcus, Nebraska was the home of many a death row soldier. But sometimes even soldiers commit war crimes. And thus the euthanasia coaster was commissioned by the US government to put an end to the ruffians who simply had no hope of rehabilitation. The design was as follows. The lucky participant is taken on a near 90-degree chain lift of 1,600 feet. They are then suspended there before the first drop to really reflect upon their final moments of life. They have about 30 seconds before they are plummeted into the first loop. The first loop being the biggest, with 7 more loops in succession, decreasing in radius, putting more and more positive G's on the guest. Now, as we mentioned before, the human body can only withstand about 10 positive G's of force until they start to lose consciousness. There's no frills to this coaster. Once the participant loses consciousness, they are then taken on an unbanked, sharp right-hand turn, entering a straight track that goes right back to the station, where the deceased are unloaded and new passengers can board immediately after. Thus, the controversial euthanasia coaster, a groundbreaking and record-breaking coaster constructed by the genius Julie Jonas or Bonus in Justice World, Nebraska, ended the Coaster Wars. Now, moving on to the post-war era. Why were there no more innovations in coasters after the war?
Well, as Frankie may have mentioned, many of the patrons of this coaster were indeed themselves participants in the Coaster War. Thus, many combatants were essentially eliminated from the battlefield intentionally via the euthanasia coaster. Reports from the afterlife have informed us that at the pinnacle of the euthanasia coaster, many of the participants realized the error of their ways and came to terms with the horrible misdoings of their past and realized that they could change their lives and become better functioning people before being launched into their 10 loops of death. But in any case, eventually there were no more post-war era coaster innovations. Many parks closed down, some are still in operation, but overall no new coaster technology has been developed since 1962 and the advent of the euthanasia coaster. And many historians argue about the reason why no more coaster innovation was granted, but I think that trying to approach this from an engineering perspective is the wrong angle entirely, when really this is a religious and spiritual reason why there's no more coaster technology. And the reason is the euthanasia coaster brought to a T the ultimate purpose of roller coasters, which is the simulation of death. And once the reality or the inevitability of death is made apparent on the euthanasia coaster, or by the euthanasia coaster rather, very few people found any excitement or thrill. As the legendary jazz singer Chet Baker once said, "The thrill is gone. Love was grand when love was new. Birds were shining, skies were blue." As many of us understand now, death is only the beginning of the end. And for most people, the roller coasters we want to ride now are mostly just shameless, feelingless, sensationless corporate tie-ins with licensed characters, rather than their epitomized and ultimately perfect platonic forms, which were suicide simulators.
A truly poetic end to a long and brutal war. As Crage said, that's kind of the end of all the coaster innovations. Thank you once again to Disney Space for sponsoring this episode. We really appreciate all that you've done for us. And again, we don't have a coupon code for Disney Space. We just want you to. I mean, we don't have any choice in the matter. This is a worldwide ad campaign, so it's not really our say whether or not we get to have. Anyways, that about wraps it up. Do you guys want to move on to things that people have written to us and sent through with the mail or other means towards us and into our hands and mailbag? Sounds great. Well, why don't you start, Crage?
Oh, look. Looks like we have some reader mail. So we have a letter here from Nathan from Omaha, New Jersey. He says, partial credit will be given, so show all of your work neatly and use extra sheets if necessary. So Nathan, I think that one of the fundamental issues that you have with this subject material is not actually unique to you. It's pretty much, endemic on all people by default who are complete novices in this topic. And if I was in your position, as I was once, I would not necessarily be embarrassed by this, but it's very important that you take an opportunity to really consider the fact that the things that you're saying right now aren't just incorrect. They're not just a fallacy of your knowledge. They are actively harmful to the people around you. And unless you can learn to overcome your own ultimately, these aren't even personal biases you have. These are just fundamental human biases that would come cooked in with us, is the fear of the unknown, the fear of people who are different than us. And unless you can find a way to educate yourself by the means of experiencing life from the perspective of other people, or if I were you, judging by the character of your writing, I would just never interact with anyone ever again. So I hope that this motivates you to either change who you are fundamentally to meet the criteria I've given you, or the motivation to never interact with another human being for the rest of your life. Thank you for writing us, Nathan.
For reference, Nathan sent us in a looks like 7th grade math packet that has a big A+ on it, 100%.
This next letter comes in from Edna from Buffalo, New York. Edna says, Mon Dieu, je suis aveugle. Well, I'm sorry to hear that you've gone blind. I don't know how you wrote this letter, let alone in French, but I would suggest seeing a doctor. Well, pardon the expression. Visiting a doctor to get that checked out. Je suis très désolée et bonne chance.
All right, looks like I have time for one more topic. This comes from. Oh my god! Oh, Walt Disney.
What?
Yeah, Walt Disney wrote us. It looks like. Sorry, I just read it. No relation to the actual guy. He just happens to be named that. He writes, "Hi, Info Crew. I have a real problem in my high school class. Everyone makes fun of me because my name is Walt Disney, but I'm not even remotely related to the guy. What can I do to make my classmates see the light and stop poking fun at me for having such a cool, identifiable name?" Well, that's amazing. I didn't know that it was possible for someone else to be named Walt Disney. I thought only one name allowed per person. I'm not sure what your relationship is with the Disney Corporation, or whether or not you were this is a psyop to infiltrate the Infopedia podcast village, but it's not gonna work. You gave us your pittance, the scraps that you gave us for what you consider to be compensation for your worldwide ad campaign, and honestly, I'm not mad. I just want this whole ordeal to be over with. Thank you, Walt, for writing in.
And thanks to all of our wonderful listeners for tuning in once again. This concludes episode 6 of the Infopedia podcast. I'm Crage too.
I'm Frankie.
And I'm Teafed.
Stay info.
Everyone.